Good morning. I'm Kevin Whitman. I'm Superintendent at Barrs, Director for Assessment and Accountability, and welcome to the March Assessment and Accountability webinar. A couple housekeeping notes. Everyone joining today is muted, but if you have questions during the presentation, you can send them to the team through the questions pane. Simply type in your question and click send, and we'll answer those. If you need any technical assistance, please send us a chat. Our team is monitoring that, and we'll do our best to help. We've also posted our presentation as a document, so you can download and follow along, and we have also posted the script. Our presentation is being recorded and is going to be posted on our website along with that transcript as well. I have a few announcements related to the ISATs. First is that the in-person ISAT testing window opens on March 15th. For remote testing, that window opens on April 12th. And as a reminder, most students should test in person, and that remote option is only available for districts that have applied and have been approved. The remote application closed on March 1st, but let us know if your situation has changed for some reason and you now need to consider that option. The link to the application itself is going to remain posted until March 12th, and after that, you'll just need to contact us directly. We've also introduced some special flexibility this year to allow teachers to serve as test administrators for their own students. And this applies to remote and in-person testing. In remote testing, that flexibility is to make sure that students are able to work with a familiar person. And for in-person testing, we have that flexibility to minimize student interactions in case that leads to additional COVID-19 spread. So if you're using that flexibility, district and school test coordinators must notify us by reporting it via the test incident log prior to the administration. And this is to protect teachers in case there's any variability in scores. And we have directions for how to do that in the Assessment Integrity Guide. If you have any questions, though, please let us know. Finally, I wanted to share a reminder about IDLA, since we know many schools are working with them this year to help provide some instruction in an online environment. And as we enter the spring assessment window, please be aware that IDLA is not a school for accountability purposes. And so the home district and base school are still responsible for assessing the student, even if instruction in the relevant subject is provided by IDLA. So please just keep that in mind as you're scheduling your test. Also, I wanted to mention some things about an accountability waiver. On February 22nd, the U.S. Department of Education announced that they would release a new waiver template for states to manage federal accountability requirements. And that was actually released on Monday, and the SDE is currently finalizing a draft response. So this is really consistent with the previous addendum approach we've talked about with you, but there are a few modifications. So I wanted to mention some highlights here as currently conceived of, and if it's approved, identifications under accountability would be paused. So schools would maintain their CSI, ATSI, and TSI status. And that would be from the last time these identifications were made in 2019. The proficiency rate penalty for participation below 95% would be removed. And there'll also be a few reporting changes. Most notable is that the state would not report progress toward meeting long-term goals and measurements of interim progress, or the student growth indicator, which is normally based on ISAT data across 2 years. That should be available for public comment soon, and we'll let you know when it is and where you can find that and provide your input. I also wanted to mention that the engagement surveys are now open. These are surveys for students in grades 3 through 12, staff and parents, and they're going to be open through March 31st. And all students in the state use the same URL to participate in the student engagement survey, but they do have to be rostered to participate. For staff and parent surveys, there are district-specific links that we sent out to superintendents and district test coordinators. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. And finally, I wanted to mention we do not have any IDAA updates today. The information on our resource page from the last webinar should still be helpful, but if you have any follow-up questions related to the alternate assessments, we'll work with Karen to get you whatever information you need. And with that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Hello, this is Paul Kleinert with some NAEP updates. Because state NAEP was postponed until next year, the National Center for Education Statistics created a survey this year to explore the impacts of the pandemic on schools nationally by collecting demographics and attendance data. For the February survey, I received a file back with the errors listed, and some reported do not have the most straightforward solutions, so I will briefly give an example. For questions 2 and 3, the question is, what is the enrollment and mode of instruction in your school? Please enter number in each category. When you have zeros listed in questions 2 and 3, leave the same cells blank in questions 8 and 9. A 0 in 8 and 9 assumes that there is a student population that is not attending, whereas a blank reflects your original answer that there is no student population in that demographic. If you listed zeros in 2 and 3, leave the same spots blank when the survey asks about attendance in questions 8 and 9. To further muddy this clarity in hopes of crystal clarity, questions 8 and 9 may be moved next to their questions 2 and 3 counterparts. It will ask about demographics, then immediately about attendance. I like this change, but wish they did it with the first iteration. This is not set in stone yet, but it sounds like those who control the survey were positive about the change. Another very important note. The survey asks about the same student population the NAEP would normally assess, only grades 4 and 8. Please don't fill out information for your whole school. Finally, I'm not sure this was a problem in Idaho, because I didn't get many errors, but I was asked to remind everyone to kindly click the submit button at the end of the survey. I understand this error because I am guilty of it. Some of my most recent bills were not paid, even though I filled out all the necessary information. A very big change is coming to the regular NAEP assessment. NAGB, the National Assessment Governing Board, decided last week to postpone the entire NAEP assessment schedule by 1 year. You already know that NAEP 2021 was postponed to NAEP 2022. You also may know that the state assessment that affects Idaho happens every other year on odd years. So the board jumped to the logical conclusion to make the state NAEP occur on even numbered years. Adjust your calendars appropriately.
Kevin Whitman, we do have some questions for you and then a few questions for Paul. First, we'll do Paul's. NAEP survey question is impossible when we had different instructional modes during January. 1 week of remote, 1 week of hybrid, and then 1 week of full-time with 1 day off a week. Same kids, different instructional models. So this wouldn't work. We can count the different dates and calculate attendance, but we can't split one kid into pieces. So I don't get this. How do we complete the survey when instructional mode can change in a month?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't split a kid into pieces. The best recommendation I can work with right now is choose 1 day in January to do just a snapshot, a point in time. And then if you have further questions, maybe we can dig into it later with a phone call or an email.
Thank you. Could we assume the same schools selected for NAEP this school year will be the same for the coming administration?
No, we cannot. We are getting a brand new sample selection next year for 2022. However, the way NAEP sampling works, the larger the school, the more diverse demographically, the higher likelihood of selection. And there's no way to say if 1 year you were selected, the next year you won't be. So know your school, know that you might be selected again.
Thank you. And then those questions for Kevin Whitman and his announcements earlier. What incident type and incident category should be selected?
I would have to confirm that. We put it in the assessment integrity guide, but now I don't remember exactly what we wrote, but we will get that and put it in the chat for you.
Thank you. Will TA test incident log require a report for each teacher and each test, or can we submit one log for several teachers?
So we are allowing you to submit one log for several teachers. So we want to have as much specific information as possible. So if you have a situation where one teacher is doing it, where they're proctoring their own students, it's great if we can have that information done individually for sessions. But if you have, let's say, school or district-wide you're doing it, we do have directions in the integrity guide where you can submit a district level or school level incident that will allow us to know that you're kind of doing this more broadly.
Do we have to complete a test incident log for every ISAT? So 4 or 5 separate incidences. And she references like the ELA CAT, ELA PT, Math CAT, Math PT, etc. because you can't select multiple tests under ISAT.
Yes, that is one thing we are requiring, even if you're doing district or school level reporting, is for each assessment type, you do have to have a separate incident log submission.
Thank you. When will we know if the accountability waiver is approved? Before testing ends or after?
Ideally, before testing ends. It's a little bit out of our hands just because it goes to the U.S. Department of Education to make that approval. What I can say is we anticipate what we submit would be approved since we're following their guidelines and they've indicated a general willingness to do that. So what you would see in our submission would be likely to be approved, but we can't guarantee anything until they do make that call. I know that the U.S. Department of Education is prepared to work quickly. So we're going to try to do the same on our side and have that information finalized as soon as possible.
Thank you. Do we have to record on the incident log if a student is tested virtually by their teacher?
No, you do not have to do a test incident just because a student is testing remotely. The student who's testing remotely, though, does need to be listed that way in the roster and tied, though, before that can be done. So.
Thank you. And then one more before we can move on. Can you please clarify, can teachers test their own students for ISATs in the school setting?
Yeah, so we are allowing it both in person and remotely this year. So again, this should be an unusual circumstance. This is really to help you out if you're having an issue and you want to minimize interaction. Best practice is still not to have teacher proctor their own students' tests. So this should really only be done when absolutely necessary, but it can be done in person and it can be done for remote students as well.
Thank you. And then we did have one straggler. So just to be clear, there is no consequence to a school or district that misses the 95% participation overall or in subgroups.
Right now, that rule is still in place for the 95% participation adjustment for federal requirements, but in the waiver template, they are inviting states to ask to have that waived. I do anticipate we will ask to have that waived, but as of right now, it is still in place.
Thank you. That was the last question for now.
All right. Good morning, Idaho. This is Andrew Bennett, and I hope you, your students, and your loved ones are well on this beautiful March day. Okay, as of last Thursday, more than 53,100 test sessions have been completed. So thank you all for your hard work and dedication in making this a reality. I do appreciate it. As a reminder, the access test window will close on March 19th, 2021, which is next Friday. In addition to the access testing window closing, district test coordinators should ensure that all secure testing materials are sent back to DRC and postmarked by March 26th, 2021. And a complete list of all access secure test materials are listed within the district and school test coordinator manual on pages 22 through 26. If a student was unable to test due to COVID-19, district test coordinators should track these reasons within WIDA AMS prior to the close of the access test window. The procedure to do this is outlined in the Tracking COVID-19 Access Non-Participants Procedures document. And the procedures document can be found on the English Language Proficiency Assessment webpage. This tracking protocol will allow the department to better measure the impact of COVID-19 and state assessment administrations. Okay, if you still require additional materials over the course of the next week, the overage test materials provided in the initial materials shipment should be exhausted before making an additional materials order. And districts should try and make only one additional material order during the 2021 access window. These additional material orders can be placed within WIDA AMS under the materials header. And I strongly advise you to get those additional materials orders in by the end of this week so that they are delivered to your district in a timely manner. Okay, the pre-reporting data validation window will be open from April 13th and April 19th, 2021, so mark your calendars. And it is imperative that districts use this pre-reporting data validation window to identify, modify, and or correct any possible errors in student demographic, accommodation, and or test result information prior to the state's analysis. An example of corrections that a district may perform are the misspellings of names, a correction of an EDU ID number, or the combining of a duplicate student record. District test coordinators can use the WIDA AMS user guide supplement for data validation found in the download library within the WIDA secure portal for more details on how to perform this action. All right, big news. So the WIDA kindergarten screener is being released on March 30th of this year. The Idaho SDE intends to use the revised version of the kindergarten screener starting on August 1st, 2021. The new kindergarten screener will replace the kindergarten WAPT test and will be used to identify provisional Ls enrolling in kindergarten and first grade first semester. The screen out criteria will be finalized soon, will be posted to the ELPA webpage and embedded into the appropriate mini manuals when we have solidified that screen out criteria. Please be looking for an email within the next 2 days. We want your feedback on that screen out criteria. And trainings for the WIDA screener for kindergarten will be accessible through the WIDA secure portal after March 30th, 2021. And before district personnel can start the training and certification process, district test coordinators will need to assign the screener for kindergarten permission set to them within the WIDA secure portal. And that will be made available starting on March 30th. There will be multiple training opportunities to become acquainted on how to administer the new WIDA screener kindergarten version in the spring and summer. And the first of these trainings will be held on April 8th and April 22nd. The training links can be found on the ELPA webpage under the training tab. So please join us for those. And the WIDA webinar series has been posted on the ELPA webpage under the training tab. Below is information on the upcoming webinars through April 22nd. Specific WebEx or Zoom webinar links are embedded into those titles and can be found again on the ELPA webpage under the training tabs. Previous webinar content can be found in the WIDA secure portal within the download library.
We have some follow-up questions for Kevin Whitman. Will the 95% accountability be exercised for the engagement survey?
Yes, so we do not have any penalty in place for schools or districts that actively participate in the engagement survey but don't hit a participation target. So we're just hoping to get representative results, but there's no penalty if you fall below that.
Thank you. And then can you please repeat what you said about the IDLA testing? Do we administer that test or does IDLA?
Sure. So you are responsible for testing those students, even if IDLA is providing education to them, since they're not considered a school for accountability purposes. So you are responsible for that testing, not IDLA.
And thank you. That's all the questions we have for now.
Hi, everyone. Kevin Chandler here at the department. A few updates for science. To start, I'm going to reiterate the forms we will have this year for Science ISAT. First up is the in-person independent field test, or IFT. That will be administered online to students in grades 5, 8, and 11 who test in person. Next up is a remote online fixed form. For those students taking a Science ISAT remotely, they will take it online, so it will be administered as a fixed form. Our testing vendor has recently finalized those online fixed forms, so the remote online fixed form testing window will open a little later than the in-person online IFT. For the Science ISAT, there will be no paper pencil forms, again, because we're administering an IFT. And for our Braille learners, we do have a few options to administer a Science ISAT, and I'll be discussing those options in just a little bit. Okay, so for our Spring 21 in-person online IFT, students in grades 5, 8, and 11 are required to test. Remember that the grade 11 Science ISAT has replaced the biology and chemistry EOCs. There's no makeup testing from last school year, and because this is an independent field test, there will be no individual student reports or reported scores from this year's Science ISAT. Keep in mind that it is SDE's expectation that most students will test in person, and their remote administration will be conducted for extenuating circumstances. Speaking of remote administration, here's a little bit more information about the remote online fixed forms. Those will be administered to students in grades 5, 8, and 11 who are in districts that have received approval to administer the ISAT summatives remotely. These are online fixed forms. The remote online fixed form testing window opens a little later after the IFT testing window on Monday, April 12th. Again, the expectation is that most students will test in person, and therefore these remote online fixed forms will only be used in situations where the district is approved to administer summatives remotely. Okay, next is the Science ISET for Braille learners. Since the ISET Science is an independent field test this year, Braille forms are not available. Braille learners will access the ISET Science using the text-to-speech and/or read-aloud accommodation. There are some items with graphics that do not include audio descriptions because an audio description would give the student the answer. For this Spring 21 test administration only, the teacher or test proctor may describe any graphics that do not have audio description. This is considered a special accommodation that requires permission. You would use the special accommodation request form that is linked on this slide. I'll talk more about that request on the next slide. You will also code both the TTS and the read aloud test accommodations in Tide. You can find the link to the special accommodations request form under the Accessibility and Accommodations resource. The screenshot near the bottom of this page illustrates the location. Most of the form is self-explanatory. You will need to provide a justification for the student needing an accommodation. All you need to do is write that is a special accommodation that is necessary because the Braille test form is not available for Science ISET this year. You should also work with your SPED teachers to ensure that the TTS and/or read-aloud accommodations are documented in the student's IEP. IEP teams should use the written notice to document the Braille is not available for ISET Science this year. Parents should clearly understand how their Braille learner will be accommodated on the ISET Science. All right, so we've gone over the types of administration available and the forms that will be administered during that type of administration. So let's combine that information with the web browser the student will use to access the Science ISET. First up is in-person administration. As I've stated before, SDE's expectation is that most students will test in person. When those students test in person, the students will have to use the Idaho Secure Browser to access the Science ISET Summative. Taking a look at our model, you can see that for in-person administration, the students will only be able to use the Idaho Secure Browser to access the Science ISET Summative. The ISET Summative will be the IFT. Next up is remote administration. To reiterate, our expectation is that most students will test in person and that a remote administration will be conducted for extenuating circumstances. But if remote administration is right for your district and SDE has approved your district to test remotely, students will still have to use the Idaho Secure Browser to access the remote ISET Summative Science test. This will be the online fixed form. One more bit of info for Science ISET. If all goes according to plan, SDE will administer an operational field test in Spring 22 in grades 5, 8, and 11. Then, after our Summer 22 standard setting, SDE will be able to provide individual student reports with scale scores. Okay, any questions about Science ISET?
We have a question more generally about the remote ISAT. Could you clarify how to move forward if we miss the March 1st deadline to apply for remote administration for ISAT? I think I heard fill out the form before March 12th and contact SDE. Who should I contact if I do need to contact the SDE? And can I complete the application today without contacting the SDE?
Yes, so officially the form closed on the 1st, but we kept it open a little bit longer, just knowing that people may need a little time and it's an unusual year where things are shifting on the go. So it will be available until the 12th. So you can still submit using that form, and that's recommended because that helps us capture all the information we need. So go ahead and use that form until the 12th. After that point, you can contact me, Kevin Whitman, if you decide to change plans and realize you need to pursue remote testing. We'll have some follow-up conversations and training if that's the case, but you can contact me directly after the form closes on the 12th.
Thank you. And then a direct question for Kevin Chandler. Is the science portion a CAT and a PT, both tests?
So for Science ISET, that's a little different than the ELA and math. The Science ISET is just one test. So it is made up of clusters and standalones. It is not comprised of a CAT and PT portion. It's just one test that is composed of just clusters and standalones.
Thank you. That was the last question for now.
So I'll throw it over to myself for the updates on the ISAT. First, let's talk about the interims. The interim testing window will close at the end of the day on Wednesday, March 10th. That is today. This means TAs will no longer be able to administer the ELA, math, and science interims via the Test Administration TA app. To say that another way, the TA app is being updated to remove the ELA, math, and science interims. There will be a few more updates to the TA app, and I'll be going over those a little later in this presentation. Additionally, students will not be able to access the interims via the remote interim testing site. That app will be removed from the ISAT portal. However, you will still be able to view the interims on the assessment viewing application, and student performance data from the interims will still be accessible in reporting. All right, moving on to the summative. As we've planned for all school year, administration of the ELA and math ISAT in grades 3 through 8 and 10 is required. There is no makeup testing from last school year. SDE's expectation is that most students will test in person, but we have allowed remote administration of summative assessments that will occur only in extenuating circumstances. With in-person and remote administration available in spring 21, let's go over the test windows for each type of administration. The in-person test window opens on Monday, March 15, and closes on Friday, May 28. The remote administration test window opens on Monday, April 12, and closes on Friday, May 28. Additionally, the ELA and math summatives will be adjusted forms. These adjusted forms will be administered in all grades and to all students testing, either in person or remotely. These adjusted forms do cover a full blueprint and consist of a CAT and PT portion. These adjusted forms have fewer items on the CAT portion, so SDE is estimating that students will spend about 30 to 40 fewer minutes on the CAT portion of the summative. A little bit later in the presentation, I'll go over where to access the blueprints for these adjusted forms. Let's go over the student performance data that will be available from the completion of these adjusted forms. So, no matter if the student is administered their summative in person or remotely, he/she will have available an individual student report or ISR. Those ISRs will be available to districts and schools to distribute to parents and students. That ISR will have an overall scale score and proficiency level. However, claim level performance data will only be available at the aggregate, meaning claim level performance data will be in our reporting system and will be available for rosters of students. Okay, so for spring 21 summatives, teachers can be test administrators, proctors, for both in-person and remote administration of the summative to their own students. This added flexibility has been put in place only for the spring 21 summative administration. DCs and SCs must report such assignments via the test incident log prior to the administration. The test incident log is available through the link in this presentation, and details have been added to the assessment integrity guide for how to report such assignments. Again, this reporting is done to protect teachers in case of any large variabilities in scores. Keep in mind also, those teachers must take and pass the TA certification course if they are administering in-person tests, and or the remote TA certification course if they are administering remote tests. Both of these certification courses are up on the ISAT portal now. Okay, so let's go over some resources available for summative testing. First up is the Spring 21 Online Summative Test Administration Manual. The TAM has been published on the ISAT portal. This year's TAM covers relevant information for both in-person and remote administration. We have also posted other resources relative to summative testing on the ISAT portal. Those resources are organized by subjects, ELA, Math, Science, and IDAA. Included in the ELA and Math folders are the blueprints for the adjusted forms and a chart that summarizes scale score ranges and proficiency levels. As I said before, the adjusted forms will be administered to students taking the summative either in person or remotely. Here you can see the grade 3 ELA and mathematics adjusted form blueprints. The adjusted form blueprints show the number of items on the CAT and PT portions of the test. They also show the number of items aligned to each claim and the targets included in each of those claims. Adjusted form blueprints have been created for grades 3 through 8 and high school. Access them on the ISAT portal. All right, so I've alluded to this earlier. The TA app is being updated at the close of business today to remove the interim assessments. But there will also be a few more updates to the TA app. On March 15, the TA app will be updated to include the in-person summative ISAT, as well as the ability to schedule test sessions. On April 12, the TA app will be updated again to include the remote summative ISAT. To reiterate, TAs will access the test administration app on the ISAT portal using a conventional browser, such as Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox. The TA app will be an application TAs use to administer the Spring 21 summatives. The TA app will be updated on March 15 to add the in-person summative and the ability to schedule test sessions. The TA app will be updated again on April 12 to add the remote summatives and include enhancements that will allow TAs to communicate with students that are taking their summatives remotely. Therefore, applications like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or Google Meet will not be necessary for remote administration of the summatives. All right, a little bit more about the ability to schedule test sessions. On March 15, when you open the TA app, you will see a session dashboard. The session dashboard will have two tabs. In the upper left corner, you can see the Active Sessions tab and the Upcoming Sessions tab. The Active Sessions tab includes the Start a New Session Now button. TAs will click that in order to immediately start a test session. To be clear, this can be done for either in-person or remote administration. However, SDE strongly encourages its use only for in-person administration. Clicking on the Upcoming Sessions tab, you will see the Schedule a Session button. That will allow TAs to schedule test sessions in advance. This can be done for either in-person or remote administration. SDE strongly encourages its use for scheduling remote test sessions. In this example, you can see I have scheduled a test session to administer the Grade 5 Science ISAT in person on April 19. I have also scheduled a test session to administer the Grade 3 ELA ISAT remotely on April 20th. Test sessions can only be scheduled to occur within the summative testing windows. So remember, both the in-person and remote testing windows close on May 28th. Again, the TA app can be accessed with a conventional browser, such as Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox. Now, we went over this model during the science section of today's presentation, but I do want to go over it again for ELA and math. As we've stated before, SDE's expectation is that most students will test in person. When those students test in person, the students will have to use the Idaho Secure Browser to access the ELA and math ISAT summit. Next up is remote administration. To reiterate, SDE's expectation is that most students will test in person and their remote administration will only be conducted for extenuating circumstances. But if remote administration is right for your district and SDE has approved your district to test remotely, students should use the Idaho Secure Browser to access the remote ISAT summative ELA and math tests. The Idaho Secure Browser provides all necessary security protections. As a last resort, the student can use an up-to-date conventional web browser, for example, Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox, on a school-owned or personal device to access the remote ISAT summative ELA and math test. Please note that Microsoft Internet Explorer and Microsoft Edge are unsupported browsers and cannot be used to access the test. Speaking of remote administration, SDE has published several resources in addition to the TAM to support remote administration. CAMU Assessment has created a special remote administration folder on the ISAT portal. Let's take a look inside. As you can see, a plethora of resources are available now. Checklists, FAQs, infographics and flyers, quick guides, training vignettes, and videos are all available now. For those districts that have applied for and have been granted remote administration capability, SDE strongly recommends you access, review, and use those documents to prepare for remote administration. Please keep in mind that some documents, for instance the FAQ, are living documents and we update it from time to time. Okay, just a few more resources I wanted to draw your attention to. First is the practice and training tests. Those practice and training tests in ELA, math, and science are available now and will be available through the summative testing windows. from the ISAT portal homepage, click on the Practice and Training Test panel. On the Practice and Training Test page, click on the Take the Sample/Training Test panel. Using a supported web browser, such as Chrome or Firefox, anyone, students, parents, grandparents, teachers, administrators, etc., can log in and take a practice or training test. As you can see, the guest user and guest session buttons are toggled on, allowing anyone to log in and practice taking the test. The other important feature I want to draw your attention to on this page is the Run Diagnostics link. Clicking on the Run Diagnostics link will take you to this page. This is a platform users can access to test internet speed for taking or administering a summative assessment. Lastly, keep in mind the important dates and secure browser panels on the ISAT portal. There are a few dates to keep in mind for this year's summative testing windows. Those dates are being documented in the important dates page. And then there's the Secure Browsers panel. Click there for information on how to install the Idaho Secure Browser on the machine students will use to access the summative test. And with that, are there any ISAT questions?
There are quite a few. First, would you recommend that we apply for remote testing even though we may not use it?
That's a good question. I would say yes. Go ahead, and if you think that remote administration is appropriate for you, go ahead and apply, even though you might not use it.
Thank you. Please clarify if the test incident log needs to be filled out when a remote student is tested by their teacher.
Yes, anytime that a student is being tested by their own teacher, whether it's in person or remote, we would like to have that reported in the incident log.
Thank you. Will we be receiving a test administration quick guide soon? Think sample test quick guide, but for starting a test. The online testing system test administrator user guide is 78 pages long, hoping for the shorter quick guide.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we talked about that last year with Cambium assessment, and I think we decided to go with just the TAM. But yeah, we can follow up with Cambium and see if they can make us a quick guide that just includes the logging on and getting started with the starting a test session.
Thank you. Will we also receive target reports by groups of students or just to the claim level with the shortened form?
So just want to clarify here, this answer is going for the information that's going to be in reporting. So this answer does not go along with the ISR. So in reporting at the aggregate, meaning groups of students on rosters, you will have abilities to have the target report for those groups of students.
Thank you. Can students remote ISAT test on an iPad and still have their audio and video enabled?
Yes, Cambium has created the test to be accessible on an iPad, so the student will be able to test remotely using an iPad. There should be instructions on how to do that in the quick guides that we have posted on the ISAT portal now.
Thank you. Could you please clarify if a teacher is proctoring for their own student remotely, do we need to submit that on a test incident log?
Yeah.
Thank you. Are we able to obtain waivers for medically fragile kids? If so, how do we go about that?
So the standard process for submitting any participation appeals at the end of the year, we anticipate that would still be in place. There is a medical exemption there if the student is going to be absent throughout the entire test window due to a medical issue.
Thank you. What happens if a TA selects a remote test even though they mean to select in person?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So what's going to happen is the TA app is going to tell you that you have selected a test that can't be administered in the way you want to administer it, and you have to go back and reselect it.
Thank you. Since the screen for selecting test sessions appears to be new, are those views available in the TA certification course? Do you have suggestions for training with this new view?
Yeah, so that's another really great question. Specifically, those session dashboard images are available in the remote TA certification course, and now they're available in this webinar.
Thank you. Will teachers who are only administering in person see the remote test options starting April 12th, or just if they took the remote TA certification course? If no, then if someone accidentally took the remote TA certification course, can it be deleted so they don't see the options of the remote tests?
Got you. I think I understand the question. So the TA app is going to be updated on April 12th to add the remote summatives. So it won't be until April 12th that those remote summatives will be available. So it's not that the TA takes the remote TA certification course and now they have access to those tests. It's just that on April 12, those remote summative will be available, and then they can be administered.
Thank you. What's the turnaround time after applying for remote administration to hear if we're approved? Are there reasons we might not be approved?
Sure. So when we set up the initial application, we promised everyone a response by the 8th of March, since the submissions were due by the 1st. For anyone coming in after that point, it's on a rolling basis. We've generally been able to get to it within 24 to 48 hours to give you a response. In terms of why you might not be approved, we anticipate supporting everyone in a way that can have them be approved, but where we would have follow-up questions is the ability and strategy to have the secure browser installed as widely as possible.
Thank you. If we have students that we think will be remote but end up being back in school, can their status be changed closer to the test date so they can take it in person?
Yes, certainly. We are adding an attribute in TIDE called parental consent for AV monitoring. If the student changes from remote to in-person, that attribute can be updated so the student can take their in-person summative.
Thank you. Do we need to collect a physical copy of the parent home agreement form, or can we have a remote signature?
It is okay to have a remote signature if that works for your district, but you do need to make sure you have a copy of that for every single student who is going to be remote testing, and that you keep copies of that throughout the testing window.
Thank you. Is there a different Proctor script for remote administration?
Yes, there is, and that is documented in the TAM.
And then this one is more of a clarification. She says, I thought because each kid was marked remote with the parent permission slip, we wouldn't have to do a test incident entry for the teacher to assess their kid. Is that on track?
So those are two different components, really. So the ability to test the student remotely is one thing, and that's what you're doing in TIDE when you verify that you have approval for the student to test remotely, and you're listing that student as either having the camera on or, again, only in extenuating circumstances, potentially off. The test incident is a separate component of that, where we don't normally allow students to be tested by their own teachers. And so this is a way for us to track that separately. So one is approval for testing, and one is for us to check and track that a student has been tested by their own teacher, which normally isn't allowed, but we're allowing that flexibility this year.
Thank you. Where will we find instructions on how to log teachers administering ISATs to their own students?
Okay, so those are going to be in the Assessment Integrity Guide. The Assessment Integrity Guide is posted on the ISAT portal and also on the SDE webpage.
And one follow-up there, Taylor, I believe Ayaka sent you a link to that, if you can share that with everyone.
I will do that. Just 1 second. And while I'm doing a few follow-up questions, will ISATs have a similar COVID non-participation for appeals similar to the access tests?
Yes, we are working on that right now, and we anticipate having the same drop-down options for COVID that we have in the access appeal site.
Thank you. When students test remotely in home or wherever, the test proctor only needs to fill out the confidentiality agreement. Is that correct?
There is the confidentiality agreement. Then they document that in TIDE. They also need to take the remote TA certification course to be able to administer summative remotely.
Thank you. Where can I find information on testing waivers for medically fragile students?
So in the participation appeals guide, we have information about what kind of documentation you would need to provide. And we can make sure there's a link for that provided as well. If we're not able to do it by the end of the meeting, it'll be in the Q&A follow-up that we post from here.
Thank you. Students taking it remote must have their camera on. Are TAs watching the students test through a secure window?
Yes. So when a student has their camera on and they're testing, a teacher or proctor will be able to see the student participating in the test, and they'll have a screen that shows all of the students at once. And then if they need to have an individual conversation with a student and the camera's on, they're able to do a one-on-one video chat. And that is secure. There's no video taken or anything like that. It's just one-to-one connection between the teacher and the student.
Thank you. Do we only have to keep the parent permission slips for remote testing through the end of the testing window? We don't need to keep it for a few years?
That is a good question, and I will have to defer on that to see if we need to have that kept a little bit longer, but we'll provide guidance to determine what the right retention schedule is on that. At the very least, it will have to be through the window, and it may be longer. So I'll make sure we provide some additional guidance on that.
Thank you. Do we need to do the incident log for special education teachers testing their own students?
That instance, because that's traditionally been allowed, for example, if it's an IDEA student, we would not have to have it in that instance. If it follows our normal procedures each year for having a student be tested by their teacher, it's okay not to include it, but it's for these unique situations we're only allowing this year with that flexibility.
Thank you. Am I understanding correctly that the only instructions available showing the new session start screen available within the remote testing certification course?
That's where they are right now, and they're also in this webinar.
Thank you. To clarify, do parents need to take the TA training?
No, parents should not be involved in the test administration, so they do not need to take TA training.
Thank you. Can proctors disable student sound remotely? For example, if I'm proctoring and I can hear a student since their microphone is still active, can I remotely turn their mic off?
No, the TA cannot function or access the student's microphone. Only the student can do that, control that.
My understanding on this, and Chandler, correct me if I'm wrong, when you're in observation mode for all the students participating at once, you won't be hearing what they're doing. You'll see a video camera, so you won't necessarily hear them until you do a one-on-one connection with the student. So you won't have ambient noise from all the kids kind of coming through.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great clarification. Exactly. Yeah, you won't have that. Everybody will be on mute until you open up that panel to talk to them. Yeah.
Thank you. And then last one, is there a limit to the number of students that a TA can test remotely at a time?
That is an excellent question. So the recommendation we've been giving is that first use the run diagnostics to check your internet speed to see how many students you can test. However, with this remote administration, it is kind of a new process that TAs will be engaging in. Therefore, the first kind of couple of sessions that you run with remote administration, we're recommending that you keep it to just a few students, maybe like 2 or 3. And then once you get a little bit more comfortable with the software, the students are really comfortable with the software as well, maybe upping that to maybe like 10. But I think those are some recommendations that need to be met, of course, with the doing the run diagnostics and to make sure how much your system can support.
Thank you. And we did have one follow-up question to the sound. Does the mic auto shut off once one-on-one communication is done then?
Right, exactly, yes.
Great, thank you. And that so far is the last ISAC question.
Excellent, thank you guys so much.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I will be covering the IRI update today. So at the end of December, iStation launched a new comparison report for district and school manager level users. This report provides a comparison between the performance data for the state, district, and school. There's also a grade level filter. The report can be found under the report tab in iStation and is only available to district and school manager level users. Note that when viewing the state aggregate, the number of students assessed is based off the sum of average students per tier, not an average of all assessed students. For this reason, you will see an NA for number of students at the state and district level. There is a training for the comparison and at-risk report available through Edmodo. If you're interested in that training, the access code to the course is right there on the slide. Beginning in fall 2021, the iStation application will move to the web through WebAssembly or WASM. This change will allow Chromebook users to access iStation through a simple URL and will improve iStation's overall capabilities. We'll provide more information and details to ensure a smooth transition closer to the end of the school year. Note that this transition will not happen prior to the May testing window. Another enhancement launching for Idaho in fall 2021 is iStation's PowerPath. PowerPath will be a new user experience with a new style, simplified menu, and more features. You can visit the interactive user guide to learn more and watch an informational video. Additional information will be shared in the coming months as the enhancements get closer. And we are getting closer to the spring testing window. The IRI testing window opens on May 3rd and goes through May 28th. All K-3 students need to be assessed. New guidance on assessing students who are deaf or hard of hearing and blind or visually impaired was published as appendices in the 2021 IRI TAM. So be sure these students are being included and assessed in May. Are there any IRI questions? And I can see them. So somebody asked to show the Edmodo code again, and I will do that. I'll put it in the chat. Oh, perfect. And then, has the SDE heard anything about the ongoing issues with on-demand assessments locking students in the ISIP loop? Teachers assigning comprehension on demands are still experiencing this. Is there anything we can do at the district level? And Kevin Whitman, correct me if I'm wrong, we have been in communication with iStation regarding this issue, or from the last update. And I think iStation sent out a newsletter with some follow-up directions, but I can follow up with that and get back to you, Kelly. And that was the last IRI question. Thanks.
All right. It's almost 11 a.m., but I am asked to keep going. It's going to be recorded, and I hope we don't get kicked out, but if that's going to be the case, then we'll send you the recording. So it is the pre-administration time for SAT and AccuPlacer. There still seems to be some confusion about this area, so I'm going to talk about pre-admin tasks this morning. For SAT School Day, College Board is working on the recorded pre-admin webinar right now, but I wanted to cover the basics of what needs to get done prior to the SAT School Day. First, please distribute the parent notification letter to the parents. The letter discusses the optional services that College Board offers. The letter in Spanish is also available on our coordinator's website. Second, please complete the SAT School Day training. Because fall and spring SAT differ slightly in terms of administration, coordinator must complete the SAT School Day training for the spring testing. I understand you are busy, but you should be able to quickly go through sections that you already know. Third, I know many of you are not hosting a pre-admin session, but you can host a pre-admin session to save time on the test day. The pre-admin session will allow your students to fill out personal information fields and select colleges and send scores. Lastly, you will need to create the master student list and assign students and staff to testing rooms. Non-standard administration report, NAR, will be available to the SSD coordinators on the 16th. You will use NAR to identify students with approved accommodations and room assignment. You can use the master student list to create testing room rosters as well. Again, more information will be provided in the recorded webinar. For AccuPlacer, first you will need to obtain access to the platform. If you are a site manager overseeing proctors, you'll need to complete the site manager account request form. You cannot accomplish this by submitting a request directly to the College Board. They will route your request to us, and it will route you to the site manager account request form. Please note that this is not an automated process, and Morgan is not always available to respond to you within 5 minutes of submission. If you are a proctor, please contact your site manager. Second, you will need to hold an IP meeting and amend IEPs for students prior to administering AccuPlacer. Please make sure to review the structure, timing, and setting of SAT or ACT and determine if the student can meaningfully participate in SAT or ACT with or without accommodations. You also need to discuss whether the student will be tested for arithmetic or QAS, which is quantitative reasoning, algebra, or statistics, as well as the mode of AccuPlacer testing, which I will discuss later. Third, you will need to obtain units to administer AccuPlacer. If you are a site manager overseeing proctors, you will need to complete unit request form. You can, but it does not make sense to purchase units directly from the College Board. We have pre-purchased units, and so please utilize what's available to you. Fourth, you must complete the certification of test administration to obtain full access within the platform. You do not have to spend 8 hours studying for the quiz. However, you will need to know the basic test security procedures to pass the quiz. I would recommend taking a quiz first and then looking up questions you missed in the manual. Lastly, pre-registration is optional. If you have 1 or 2 students, it probably does not make sense to pre-register your students. If the proctor is overseeing multiple students at the same time, it is highly recommended you pre-register your students. We just hosted a webinar about AccuPlacer Companion. In this slide, I'm going to clarify the difference between AccuPlacer Online and Companion. Both are for students with and without accommodations. AccuPlacer Online is computer adaptive, but AccuPlacer Companion is linear and non-computer adaptive, which means it takes longer to complete. AccuPlacer Companion has both digital and paper and pencil options. If your student is using Braille or is not comfortable with online testing, you may want to use paper and pencil version. College Board indicates that AccuPlacer Companion would require less human reader assistance compared to the AccuPlacer Online, or those students require screen reader programs because it is more predictable. There's no embedded screen readers in either AccuPlacer Online or Companion. There's no accommodation approval process for AccuPlacer like we do for SAT. For the voucher schools, please do not forget to have your students register for the May National and submit accommodations in a timely manner. You can monitor the registration process in the K-12 reporting portal. And lastly, the invoicing missed grade adjustment deadline for the January PSAT is March 12, 2021. Please review the data in TOS and apply fee waiver benefits to eligible students. The SDE only covers PSAT for the sophomores. Any questions?
I don't have any college entrance exam questions yet, but I do have a question for IRI. Will PowerPath be available for all K-3 students or only those districts who have paid for the full iStation package? And it is my understanding that that will be available for all K-3 students. It kind of seems like they're just completely revamping their platform due to some of the comments that we've received over the last few years. So I believe that it's for all K-3 students. And I don't see any other questions for you, Ayaka. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I know we went a little long today. It's obviously right before some major test windows here. So thank you for working with us, for being flexible, and for being willing to kind of roll along with us in what's an unusual year, to say the least. I can promise that we'll give you as much information as we can on remote administration and on the accountability updates as soon as possible. I would say our focus here is that we want to assess students. There's some important data that we can get out of that, but we're going to do our best to make sure at the same time that this is really about assessing students and not about federal accountability requirements. It's so that we can get that information to help students succeed. So as we get that all finalized, I'll let you know. And you'll also hear from us again at our next webinar. And that will be scheduled April 14th, 10 a.m. You can find the links to register at our resource center, and you can also review past webinars there. With that said, we're happy to stay on the line for any additional questions. Anything we don't know about right now, we'll get back to you as soon as possible, but we'll stay on, and thank you again for being a part of the assessment process with us and for staying a little long today.